British set sail for the South Atlantic. However, the Royal Navy is missing its large carriers. There are none in the inventory. The government had decided to rid itself of the big, expensive ships. They have only short-deck helicopter carriers, and there is only one jet which can take off and land from a ship like this. So, somewhat by default, both the Harrier of the Royal Air Force and the Sea Harrier of the Royal Navy are off to war for the first time. To gain more lift, the pilots fly off a ramp, in some cases enabling them to carry an additional 2,000 pounds of bombs into combat. At the beginning of the war, the mission of the airplane is air-to-ground attack. The single-engine jet proves vulnerable in combat. Several are lost to ground fire.
Well, they found in the Falklands War that if you punctured the airplane well enough, it went down, and within the first day of the war, they pulled the airplane back and made it a toss bombing airplane, something that you basically tossed a bomb 3 miles away so that you wouldn't get near the target. That's very, very inaccurate.
Harrier pilots are by no means left out of the fight. They must defend the British fleet from attacks by the Argentines. The Argentine pilots strike the British fleet with a fearsome weapon, the air-launched Exocet missile. Their airplanes, also loaded with gravity bombs, pound the Royal Navy, hitting 16 ships and sinking 4. The British pilots are called upon to intercept and engage the attackers. Patrols are launched, but the Harrier pilots have a missile of their own. For the Argentines, the result is devastating. A last-minute addition to the Harrier of the AIM-9 Sidewinder missile proves deadly for the Argentine pilots. In one of the most lopsided campaigns in air-to-air combat history, not a single Harrier is lost, while 23 Argentine planes are downed.
The ideal use of the airplane is what the Royal Navy does with it. They fly it as an interceptor, an airplane that protects the fleet. And during the Falklands War, it did this in sterling measure. It's probably one of the finest small interceptor fighters ever built. The reason being, you can't see it very well, and it has more thrust than weight. And those are ideal parameters.
The Argentines, having lost control of the air, are not able to fend off the British naval assault. British troops move ashore with Harriers providing air support. 2.5 months after the war began, the airfield at Port Stanley is taken by the British.
Gentlemen, I have just heard that the white flag is flying over Stanley.
Within hours, the Argentine troops surrender and a ceasefire is declared. The success of the Harrier in the Falklands goes beyond Britain and benefits the U.S. Marines. The jet had gone to war, and though its role as close air support was not stellar, its fleet defense capability quieted the critics. The Marine Corps bought the Harrier from the British in the early 1970s, and the first squadrons were formed. Because the jet has a reputation of being tough to fly, many of their best pilots rotate into the newly designated AV-8A.
We handpicked the first people that went into it. The thought was, well, let's try it, let's test it, let's get 3 squadrons worth, and that will give us enough to check out the operational characteristics, because if we could make this work, it did exactly what we wanted. At the end of 3 years and no accidents, the system came back and said, you guys must have been wrong. It can't be hard to fly. Look, this is wonderful. And so instead of gradually introducing different people to it, they just opened up the floodgates. And within the next 6 weeks, we had crashed 3 airplanes and killed 2 people.
It has a reputation. I know my wife was very concerned when I first got into the Harrier community. It was known as the widow maker, and it has killed a lot of people. It's an airplane like any other that it doesn't tolerate mistakes.
And they found really they needed a pilot with a lot of jet time, a lot of high performance, high speed time, so that his brain was up and moving all the time. And they finally made an issue out of it, not assigning nuggets to Harrier squadrons, and the loss rate went down.
This is the lineal descendant of the AV-8A, the McDonnell Douglas AV-8B. Like its predecessor, the newer model has 4 movable nozzles on the fuselage, which are used to vector or direct the thrust created by the Rolls-Royce engine. The cockpit was raised, and the bubble canopy gives the pilot greater visual range. A computer-assisted reaction control system was added to the plane to help keep the pilot out of trouble.
When they redesigned the Harrier, from the AV-8A to the AV-8B, a lot of the dangerous characteristics disappeared. They did engineer a great deal of user-friendliness into the airplane. It's an easier airplane to fly. It's slower. Pilots don't like losing the 80 to 100 knots that they've lost. They would rather go faster. But it can carry more weapons, and it is certainly not the puckering airplane it was before.
Now, the way the Harrier works is the reaction control system essentially balances the thrust vector, which is right through the center of the aircraft. Now, you think about it, it's all this thrust, it's kind of like balancing on the head of a needle. Well, what we balance that is we have reaction control air coming out of the wingtip, left side, right side, the nose, and the tail. Those are all interconnected and controlled by the stick and the rudders. For instance, if an pilot wanted to roll the aircraft to the left, he'd move the stick to the left. What would happen is air would come out of the bottom of the right wing, starting a rolling movement. Same thing holds true with the nose of the airplane. He wants to raise the nose, pulls back with the stick, which is natural for a pilot. Then the puffer duct in front of the airplane opens up, air blows down, and the nose is then picked up.
Good morning, Astro Center, Snow 1-2, single AV-8. Currently at Angel 17, negative sweet lock. Those are 8 copies, and I may need to ask you for a higher marshal to stay out of the clouds.
August 1990.
We'll give you a lat long. 123341 north, 7651 west. Snow 1-2, copy, north.
Marines and their Harriers will face the ultimate test of their plane and their training as they fly off to war for the first time. Harrier squadrons and their pilots, along with 90,000 fellow Marines, join the fight for Kuwait.
And most importantly, its future. Dive into Blue August all month long on Planet Green.
Harrier pilots in the Gulf are told they won't play a role until the ground war begins. They're going to be held in reserve.